Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us for the first event in the 2026-2027 President's Speaker Series. AI at the Edge, Building the Infrastructure of the Future, a conversation with Dan Wright. Following President Gash's conversation with Dan, we will take questions from the audience. You may submit a question at any time using the QR code on the back of your program, or also shown on screen here in a few minutes. Please silence your cell phone and refrain from flash photography or video recording during the program. Thank you.
Are we live? All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here, and thanks to those of you watching streaming online right now. At Pepperdine, we talk about things that matter. We ask big questions, pursue truth with humility and courage, and welcome people whose work helps us see the world more clearly. We believe that truth, having nothing to fear from investigation, should be pursued relentlessly in every discipline. We believe that the courageous conversations that take place here on this campus produce student leaders the world so desperately needs. Leaders with both competence to shape the fields they enter, from healthcare to the fine arts to technology, and with the courage to shape those fields for good. Few subjects at the present will shape our shared future more profoundly than artificial intelligence. Most public conversations about AI focus on what happens on our screens or inside enormous data centers. Today's conversation takes us somewhere else entirely, to oil fields, to remote communities, to disaster zones, to industrial sites, to key national security environments, and soon to space. Places where the data is actually generated and the decisions made can carry immense human consequences. Our guest is building the infrastructure that brings computing and AI into those places. His work invites us to consider what might be possible when our very best systems of intelligence can operate almost anywhere, maybe not even almost anywhere. What problems will be solved, what dangers might emerge, and what kinds of wisdom and moral courage will be required of the people who can lead such a brave new world is what we're going to be talking about today. So Dan Wright, our guest today, is an entrepreneur with deep experience in driving growth and operational excellence in disruptive companies across the spectrum of technology. He is the co-founder and CEO of Armada, working to bridge the digital divide and bring AI to the true edge. Wright previously served as the CEO of DataRobot, a leader in augmented intelligence that was named to the CNBC Disruptor 50 and Forbes Cloud 100 lists for 3 years in a row. Earlier in his career, Dan was the COO of AppDynamics, which was a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. I don't even know what that is. We'll hear what that is.
It's very important.
Okay. It's magical, too, apparently. For application performance monitoring for 7 years in a row, one of Glassdoor's best places to work, and acquired by Cisco for $3.7 billion. He also serves as an investor, board member, and advisor to leading startup companies, including Tonal, the exercise system that shapes this body. You may want to sell short on that. Importantly for us today, Dan is a member of the Pepperdine family. He graduated in 2006 from Seaver College. His wife, Betsy, is also an alum, And he's shaping the world for good and returning home to help us think clearly about the future he is helping to build. So please join me in giving a warm Pepperdine welcome to Dan Wright. Okay, so here's how it's going to work. Dan and I are going to talk for 40 or so minutes, and then we're going to turn it over to you all for audience questions. And the way you will submit those questions, as Kobe said earlier, is through the QR code that's on your program or on the screen. And so those will be sent to this trusty little iPad I have here, and we'll run through a chunk of those before we close. So welcome back, Dan. Welcome back to Pepperdine.
It's great to be back.
So you've been back here since 2006.
I have. So Pepperdine is a special place to me and to our family. My wife Betsy and I met here. She's on the board of Seaver College now, so gives us a good excuse to come back at least once a quarter.
Okay, so take us back to 2006, or during the time you were here prior to that. What experiences or people helped shape the person and leader you became?
Pepperdine shaped me in so many ways. I feel like when I came here, I was a kid, and when I left, I actually had some idea what I wanted to do with my life, which is a big step forward. And a lot of it came down to people. Some of my favorite professors to this day were Pepperdine professors, including my all-time favorite professor, who is Professor Paul Contino of Great Books fame. Professor Contino.
Hope you're watching from London, Paul. I don't know if you are. He's in London this semester.
He is. I wish he was here, but hi, Paul. Hi, Professor Contino, I should say. He did a really amazing job of pushing me to think deeply about things that really mattered in life, and then also write about them, like to write in kind of long-form, deeply researched ways that I hadn't really written ever before. And that actually was one of the things that ultimately led to me going to law school. I also took a business law course here. So I was kind of like trying to figure out, do I want to go into like writing? Do I want to go into business? What is it? And I settled up going to law school, and we'll talk more about that. But I was very fascinated with business, and then I also just met so many good friends here. Like just a few weeks ago, we were out visiting Josh and Karina Baldwin, who were my housemates in Florence, and Josh was my roommate, my fraternity mate. I was a Sigma Chi here, and our families are like family. We're super close, and so those types of relationships form me in a lot of different ways that continue to form me.
Yeah, so Florence, was Elizabeth Watley the director then?
She was.
So, hey, Elizabeth, we can say to all our people around the globe.
Ciao.
Yeah. Ciao, yeah. I thought that meant goodbye. I don't know.
It's both.
Okay,
I know
there we
it's
go.
confusing.
I'm learning everything today. So here's a question for you. You mentioned Paul Contino and how important he was. He was a great books professor. You're in technology. Tell us kind of how great books thinking and learning to read and to write has helped shape your technology career.
I think one of the things that great books taught me to do that has helped me in everything I've done in life is just go very deep on a topic and be able to think deeply on a topic and then write in a very persuasive way. And that is important when I was a lawyer, although I'll tell you I wasn't a lawyer for that long. It was important when I did that. And it's been very important in business. A lot of what you have to do in business is convince people of things, right? You have to be able to pitch your idea, pitch your company. You're constantly telling your story, whether you're talking to Fox News or you're talking to some new recruit. And so your ability to really understand a topic deeply and then be able to pitch why your thing is so important and is the answer is very important. And then I think the other thing, just kind of like the study of great books, and I did a lot of like humanities type courses. I went and spent a year in Florence studying all of the history there, being immersed in history. It really inspires you to try to do something with your life that sort of makes a dent in history. To me, one of the things that I took from that is that a lot of people go through life sort of playing it safe. But playing it safe in many ways is the most dangerous thing you could do, because it could mean that you never actually make your mark. And so it made me want to do something that actually was meaningful with my life.
Well, playing it safe is not what we say when we talk about entrepreneurs. So you made the shift from a great books scholar or thinker to a lawyer. What caused the shift into entrepreneurship and technology, and how did that come into being?
I was always interested in technology. So I grew up in the countryside in the foothills of Northern California before moving down here to Pepperdine. And I had a lot of family that was in Silicon Valley, including my grandparents were like next door to the original Apple headquarters on Bubb Road in Cupertino. And so I was always just like kind of fascinated with the idea that you could take something from an idea to a sort of world-changing company. And I explored that here at Pepperdine. I was an international business major. I took all of my business courses. I minored in Italian, which has not been used as much in my current career, but was a lot of fun and was great when I went back to Italy with my family last year. Had a little bit, enough to get us around. But what I found was, even as I went to law school, that fascination for building something from nothing that could have an impact stuck with me. And so even, my first year in law school, I was focused on litigation, and I actually clerked for a Massachusetts Supreme Court judge. And at the end of the summer, I spent my summer clerking for him, great judge, Justice Cordy. I thought, wow, if these are the most interesting cases and I'm like totally bored, this is not my thing. And so I went from that and I immediately focused on business law, working with startups, and then that was it. And then eventually I passed the bar, went to work at one of the largest law firms in the world, working with just tech companies. And one of the entrepreneurs that I had incorporated this company called me and said, "What are you doing with your life?" And I was like, "Oh, you're right. You're doing what I want to do with my life." And then I went and joined him.
Okay, so before we get into the specifics of it, we've gotten to know each other the last couple of years. It's become clear in our interactions that faith is a really important part of your life. And so talk to us about your experience at Pepperdine in the faith aspect and kind of how that's shaped the way you've gone about your career and what you're thinking about now.
Yeah, I mean, I think college is such an important time for anybody. It's you grow up. I grew up in the church, but really it was kind of in high school that I started to make my faith my own. And then when I was at Pepperdine, that like went into overdrive. I feel like it's a sink or swim moment for your soul. Kind of like you are at a crossroads where you're going to choose once you're out of the house who you're going to be for the rest of your life. And I felt like at that point in my life, being surrounded by a university that embraces faith, by a faith community, was everything. And ultimately, that informed who I became friends with, how I spent my time, who I ended up marrying, and then that ended up shaping the rest of my life. And I think there's lots of visible ways that Pepperdine does that, and having been back on campus now, I love to see just how visible faith is here on campus. But I remember going into the CAF every day and seeing freely you received, freely give, and that's something that has like stuck with me through all these years, and I try to remember that and keep that as a central part of my faith.
Excellent. So let's now take you to AppDynamics and DataRobot. Leading roles with those companies. Those companies had liquidation events and things went well. Those got sold. When did you first have the inkling that there's a need in the market for something that's not there yet, and I have an idea of what that could be? So tell us how the seed for Armada came to be.
Yeah, so Armada is my third technology company, and all of the companies have been different, but they've had a common thread, which is data, AI. AppDynamics was very much about taking brick and mortar businesses and helping them to transform to do their business online, and making sure that we could use AI to detect if anything was going to go wrong in their application, a business's application, before they lost business or somebody switched to another option. And then DataRobot was all about democratizing AI, making it accessible to people who are not data scientists. And it was really from those two companies that I saw there was just like this massive divide, the haves and the have-nots when it comes to AI. And I really started to dig into that. And what I realized is that AI had not reached the edge. It had not reached the oil fields. It had not reached the mines, the battlefields, the places where there are natural disasters where you need to respond in split second. And everybody seems to think, living in a big city, that AI is everywhere. but it's not. It's only, in about 30% of the world where we have these big hyperscale data centers, and then everything else, it's the same way it was decades ago. And with AI, that is the technology revolution of our time. I knew that if we didn't fix that, if we didn't bridge that digital divide, it was going to cause lots of issues, whether it's, hey, really bad things happen in these different areas that are preventable, or we don't get the productivity out of our operations that we could, or, a natural disaster hits, or there's a threat on a battlefield that could have been avoided and somebody dies. And I just felt compelled. I felt like it was something that I had to fix, and just kind of became obsessed with the problem.
Okay, so recognizing there's a problem, seeing that there is a potential solution, what made you have the courage to say, I think it can be me and some friends? How did that come to be? How did the team form, and how did the idea turn into a company?
I think it was a few things at once. It all sort of started with a friend conversation, which is an investor in my prior company, a firm called 137 Ventures, had been an investor in SpaceX. Actually, this is now public. They were one of the largest investors in SpaceX, because SpaceX just went public.
Had a good day.
They had a very good day. I had dinner with Justin and his wife Lauren. Justin runs the firm, a couple weeks ago, and they had a good day. But I started talking to them about this idea, and then I started to talk to another good friend of mine, Trey Stevens, from Founders Fund. And what we all sort of coalesced on was, there's lots of ideas that I had and things that I could have done. I was considering a few other company ideas, but this was the one that felt like a hard quest, that was something that was needed, that nobody else was going to be able to do. And at the time, Trey was actually writing an article called Choose Good Quests, this is online. I would definitely recommend going and reading it.
Choose Good Quests?
Choose Good Quests. And the whole premise of the article, he'd sent me an early draft before he published it, and we were talking about it, but it's after you have some success in Silicon Valley, what most people do, or in tech more broadly, what most people do is they go and they start a VC firm, or they're going to go and they'll just hang out on a beach, something that's easy. And his argument, which I very much agreed with and still agree with, is that those people are the people that we need taking on the really hard quests that nobody else will do, that are important, right? There's lots of hard quests that actually don't matter that much, and nobody should work on that. And then there's easy quests that are, things that don't really move the needle, like creating another SaaS app. And he's a good friend, because he said nobody needs another AppDynamics, right? This is something that is meaningful, that is worthwhile. And I really felt convicted by that. I felt like I had to do something with my life that, again, would be meaningful, and that this was my opportunity to do it. And I looked around. I did my research on the market, talked to a lot of companies that had been my customers, and what they told me was, this is a massive problem. Nobody has taken it on, in part because it is so hard, but that if you could figure it out, if you could make it work, it would literally save lives. It would literally change industries, and it would help America preserve its place in the world. And so I said, that's good enough for me.
Good enough for an important quest.
Yes.
So most of us experience AI on a screen, on a phone, where we're connected to the cloud and we do interesting things. Some of them fun, some of them productive, some of them probably wasting time. You're talking about AI at the edge. And so when we first met and you talked about, oh yeah, we do AI at the edge, I'm like, which edge? What does that mean? For the non-technocrats here, what does it mean to do compute at the edge?
Well, I'll start with, what does it mean for it not to be done at the edge, right? So typically what happens with AI is that it's all done in the cloud. And when people think about the cloud, they think it's this amorphous thing, but really all of the cloud is a bunch of big data centers. And so these models are trained.
Which are not on the cloud, they're in the ground.
They're on the ground.
They're on the ground.
Yeah, they're on the ground, and they take up a lot of ground. But they're trained and run on the ground. The issue is, again, only about 30% of the world has these big hyperscale data centers. And if the source of the data is really far away from those data centers, it causes all sorts of issue where AI just doesn't work. It's impossible. And what I mean by that is there is latency, so you're not even getting real-time analytics, let alone predictive analytics. And ultimately, it just sort of all falls apart. And so that is one way of thinking about it. Another way of thinking about it is like, okay, what is AI at the edge in terms of how it functionally works? So have you been in a Waymo? I think when you came and visited me in San Francisco, you might have done one. Do they have them in LA now?
They have them around. I have not yet been in one. Courage is lacking to get in a car driven by no one.
All right, but we probably have some people who've used like full self-driving, right? So that is AI at the edge. That is using AI in the real world. Another way of thinking about AI at the edge is real world AI to solve a problem. In that case, it's like, how do we have safer cars that don't crash and kill less people? That is a real world application of AI at the edge. You try to do that in the middle of the desert in Saudi Arabia, it's not working because there's nowhere for them to actually connect back to process the data. So that's a real world example.
Okay, so give us some more examples. Let's take us on a trip to Alaska. Alaska, I've watched a video online of the use that the Alaska Department of Transportation has started using, they're using Armada to help with safety issues away from these hyperscaler data centers. Tell us how that came about and walk us through how that works and why it's important for Alaska Transportation Center to have Armada.
Yeah, I love the Alaska example because, and they say this in the video online, which is, in their case, the edge is real, right? There are no data centers, or at least there were no data centers before they started working with us in Alaska, and that causes real-world issues. They use Starlink for connectivity, and then they use drones, Skydio drones, to respond to avalanches and floods and other natural disasters. And Alaska is a very remote state. These almost always happen in remote areas. And if you don't respond in the split second, people die. And so they had this issue when we started working with them that they had to send all the data out of the state to be processed on one of these hyperscale data centers, and that caused 28 hours of latency. And these things don't waste, these natural disasters don't wait 28 seconds, let alone 28 hours, and so that's just not going to work. And so what we were able to do is deploy one of our modular data centers. We call them galleons because they sail to the data, and we were able to cut that to real time to save lives. And that was one of those moments where it's like, okay, that thing that we theoretically thought could happen in terms of saving lives, now we're actually out there doing it.
So they're now processing the data in real time rather than 28 hours later.
In real time.
So we've all seen the tragedy that unfolded in Nepal, where they had real-time disasters. What, if anything, could the use of an Armada galleon in that context have? What impact could that have made, if any?
Yeah, obviously that is very tragic. There are other examples, actually, like when I started Armada, one of the first things that I learned about was that there are a lot of dams that break. Actually, I was researching this thing that happened in Brazil where there was a dam break a few years ago that killed a few hundred people. And I was like, well, why is that? And how could we prevent that? It turns out there are usually, I don't know about that particular structure in Nepal, but there are usually sensors all over these things. The issue is processing the data in real time. The issue is the latency. And so if you actually were able to, one, have sensors all over those things, which if they can't, if they don't already, that technology exists, and it's pretty cheap these days, then all you have to do is put a galleon there, one of our modular data centers, and you can do real-time 24/7 monitoring of that structure to detect anything wrong with it, to detect some sort of weakness, and just catch things proactively before the really bad thing happens. We did a launch video when we started the company, and we were talking about these sorts of disasters and how AI, kind of the highest purpose of AI in my mind, is saving lives. And a lot of that comes down to just applying this technology ahead of time that exists, so that those things just don't happen. And you can't avoid all of them, and you can't avoid, bad things happening in the world, but what we can do is try to be proactive to avoid as many of them as possible, and then when they do happen, mitigating the damage.
So, for example, GPS monitors on glaciers that track movement that then creates risk of catastrophic movement with data centers nearby following that as it's happening, as opposed to finding out about it later.
Yeah,
is that an idea?
Yeah, there are multiple things you can do. So one is that. There's also like, geospatial intelligence that we work with a lot of companies that do this, that kind of monitor different surface areas of the Earth for irregular activities to try to avoid natural disasters, not just that type of thing, but like fires are another example. And then if I remember, correctly, with Nepal, there was the glacier, but then there was also the dam break, down below. And so that would be another thing, is like, can you put sensors all over the dam and then monitor that thing 24/7? And if there's any sort of step that could be taken ahead of time to strengthen that dam, you do it, right?
Or evacuation or something.
Or evacuate, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So you mentioned that about 30% of the country, or the world, is served by hyperscaler data centers. And then you mentioned satellites, for example, Starlink, that they were relying on in Alaska. Explain why a satellite isn't, why isn't that good enough?
Yeah.
Talk to me about the latency problems that we have even with Starlink.
I mean, Starlink is a game changer. So when Armada started, we started it in partnership with SpaceX. And at the time, it was mainly a consumer product. But we knew that they were going to go into enterprise, and they were going to start selling to governments. And ultimately, what that will do is that will cover the world with connectivity that is as good, in a few years as having fiber in the ground, pretty much anywhere. And that is amazing. And that right there is a huge step forward in terms of technology and what it can do. The issue is, if you try to send all of the data back, it is, number one, hugely expensive to do that. And so most organizations just won't, by virtue of the cost of it. Mm-hmm. The second issue is, in these more remote areas, even with Starlink, there's some latency. And then the third is, the security and kind of the sovereignty. And then the fourth is the size of the models themselves. The models that are being used today are typically larger than they used to be. And so you wouldn't want to be constantly sending models back and forth. Instead, the architecture that makes the most sense for all the reasons I mentioned is you take models that have been trained in the cloud, you push them to run locally on all that data at the edge, and then rather than sending all the data back, you just send the warning back. Hey, there's something here that you need to pay attention to, and here's an action that I'm recommending you take. And there you go.
Okay, so you mentioned putting the galleon at the edge where the data is being generated, and that involves what we saw on a truck driving. We crack one of those things open. What's inside?
Yeah, it is a true data center. So it looks a lot like the hyperscale data centers, but it is modular. And so if humans go in there, and it has a hall in there where you see your servers, you see your GPUs, your graphical processing units, where you can actually run the AI models. There's all your connectivity. They have usually Starlink plus a geo satellite connectivity. It also has SD-WAN devices, and it has sensors all over it for temperature and humidity monitoring and things like that. And then we also have a private 5G connection so that it can ingest data from different, we call them connected assets, sensors and drones and robots and autonomous vehicles and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, powered by what, cooled by what?
So the cooling can be either air cooling or liquid cooling. Air cooling is better for a unit that needs to be permanently mobile. We deployed these things we deployed one on a Navy ship last year. First time edge computing had been done at scale for the Navy. We deploy them, State of Alaska is another good one where that one's designed to be kind of permanently mobile. But then there's other ones where you don't need them to be mobile, and you're just trying to maximize the power of the unit to do many different types of AI models in a location, and that's when liquid cooling is optimal. And then on the power, we're sort of agnostic on the power. We plug into whatever power is available. We do have units that have the power inside if that's needed. But a lot of times our customers have power. You know, it's either they're using a commercial generator, or like the Navy can plug it into ship's power, or one of these, we work with a lot of oil and gas and mining companies. They typically have power on all their sites already. And so we can take advantage of it, which is one big plus, because one of the big issues with the hyperscale data centers, and this has been in the news a lot lately, is, okay, well, where are we gonna get all the power? Is it gonna increase taxpayer, electricity bills? And I think there's a lot of misinformation out there and misconceptions about that. But Armada is also like the perfect answer. It's like all the benefits of AI and data centers with none of the drawbacks, because we use all of this stranded power that's already available all over the world.
Okay, when you say stranded power, what do you mean by stranded power?
Stranded power meaning that there's a huge amount of pockets of readily available power that are not connected to the grid that we can use. We did a white paper last year called American AI Dominance, and what it talked about is how there's 6 gigawatts today of stranded energy, largely natural gas, some of which is like flared into the atmosphere, and you can use that for AI, use it to power modular data centers like Armada's. Or as another example, I just was in New York last week with one of our customers, Fossil, that's doing a gigawatt of AI capacity in the Nordics, Norway, Sweden, Finland, by 2030, and they're doing it with our infrastructure, but they're using hydroelectricity. We have another project in Australia where they're using wind and solar power to do a massive project. And so there are lots of pockets around the world where you're not pulling from the grid, so it's not impacting taxpayer electricity bills. Also, all of ours are kind of self-contained cooling, so we don't use any external water. And they also don't disrupt communities because they're typically in the middle of nowhere, but you get all of the benefits because what we do is manufacture all of our units, and so we create a lot of jobs right here in America. And it's sort of like, I give the analogy that it's like World War II, when we reindustrialized and went from making cars to making, the things that we needed to win World War II, like tanks and planes and munitions. That's what we're doing. We have a new manufacturing facility in Arizona called Galleon Forge 1, where they used to make air conditioners, and now they're making our modular data centers, and that's going to create 500 new jobs. And then we have a plan to do a much larger facility, which is not public, but since we're friends here, I'll tell you.
It's not being recorded either.
That will be thousands of American jobs.
Fantastic. Well, you mentioned, alluding to going to war. In many ways, there is a non-kinetic war happening for AI dominance in the world. Part of that is driven by sovereignty of data, to make sure that you have your own data as opposed to relying on someone else. For those of the folks here who were like me, who didn't necessarily immediately know what sovereign data meant, talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I've been talking about sovereign AI since we started the company almost 4 years ago, coming up on 4 years ago. And at the time, that was sort of a new concept to people, but now it's all anybody wants to talk about. And there was actually a moment, I went with our CTO Pradeep to Davos in January, and all everybody wanted to talk about was sovereign AI, and there's a very practical reason why, which is there's a very real-world concern that's happening about ownership and control when it comes to AI. And people do not want their AI to be controlled by a hyperscaler. They do not want their AI to be controlled by one of these foundation model companies like the OpenAIs or the Anthropics of the world. And they don't want it to be controlled by another nation state in the case of governments. They want to preserve their own sovereignty. And at the same time, what's happening is there is a sort of a Cold War that's going on right now between the US and China when it comes to AI. And if you've been watching the news, China is like all in to win this race because what they understand is that this is the race of our time. If we lose this race, we just lose in terms of what it means to our economy, what it means to national security, and what it means to our overall place in the world. And it's not optional either. It's either like we win the AI race and we build the AI here, or we buy it from somebody else. So that's the real world choice. And what sovereignty, what we're doing to kind of marry those two things is we are leaning into this trend of sovereign AI, which Armada is a unique solution for because our customers actually own the infrastructure. So they own it. They can take these models that have been trained in the cloud, but they can run them on their own sovereign infrastructure. And then
So they buy the galleons.
They buy the galleons, and then what our software does is all of the orchestration of the GPUs and kind of everything to make it work locally in their operations, whether it's a company or it's a country. And it's my shorthand. I was on Fox recently, and I said it's like AI in a box, wherever you need it. And nobody else does that. And so as a result, we've had a lot of those nation states start coming to us, and actually we work really closely with the Department of State and Commerce as part of the AI export program that was launched, which I think is brilliant. And every day we are getting new opportunities coming to us where a country is raising its hand and says, I have a countrywide sovereign AI initiative. I need to do a full infrastructure refresh for this AI revolution that's going on. And I'm either going to work with the US or I'm going to work with China via Huawei. And we're Team US out there making that happen. And I think it is the most important thing in my view. I mean, obviously, I'm biased, but like, we have to win that. So that's what I wake up thinking about every day.
Well, when you wrote the white paper you referred to recently, Armada's US AI dominance, the white paper, you made the point that there's more you have to win than just the AI technology. You got to win some other things. You got to win a race on energy. You got to win a race on computing capacity. Tell us about the actual multi-pronged, multi-level, three-dimensional race that's happening right now, and what are the consequences of not winning?
Yeah, so the models get a lot of attention, and I think that's because it's the most in-your-face thing. A lot of people use ChatGPT now on their phone. It's funny, when we started Armada not very long ago, ChatGPT 1 had just launched. There was no Anthropic, there was no XAI, and see where we have come in a few years. We knew that was going to explode, though. But the models are very important. We have to win there, but that's only part of the picture. You have to win on power, as you said, and that is an issue because China has been moving extremely aggressively on nuclear, a lot of different forms of power to try to win there. You know, I'm very happy to see that there's a lot of really exciting companies innovating in that space. Like, you know, we were talking about Valor Atomics. There's another one called Antares, micronuclear reactor companies that they're sort of like our galleons. They can go wherever they're needed. And then
they power without having to plug in anything.
Yeah, and you can just pair them with our, galleons, and boom, it's like AI in a box with the power wherever you need it. And then there's other, technologies, like there's one called Exowatt that's it's like a massive solar battery. You have one down here in LA called General Matter that's doing nuclear at a scale that we haven't seen in a very long time. And then you have, data centers in space, which is another way of answering it. Sun's the ultimate source of energy. So we have to win on power, and then our focus is on the infrastructure. You can have the most powerful data centers, or you can have the most powerful models in the world, you can have all the best power, but if you can't deploy those models where you need them, and also enable sovereign AI, which is what the world is saying, and the market is saying very clearly it wants, then they're all going to go to who they can get it from, which is China and Huawei.
Lot at stake. So here's the question: as the world is racing toward AI dominance, there are risks associated with that, because if that becomes the most important thing, then you've got issues with respect to, democratic accountability, liberty, human dignity. You've got the privacy issues. As a person of faith, how do you try to put together all of the things that are really important without losing something that's even more important? And how does that impact this whole race? And so, for example, I know you won't be able to be here, but September 25th and 26th, we've got the 6th annual Human-Centered AI Conference happening here, where one of the days is largely devoted to the intersection of faith and artificial intelligence. So walk us through how you think about maximizing, optimizing the things that are really important in minimizing the risks that go along with AI explosion.
I think number one is, as people of faith, and this would be, I guess, a call to action for everybody here in the room, like we have to show up, because like I was saying earlier, this AI revolution that's going on, we don't get the option of sitting out. It's either going to happen to us or we're going to make it happen. And if we let it happen to us, I can guarantee you the people that will shape it aren't thinking about the things that we're thinking about as people of faith. How do we actually be thoughtful and make this a force for good versus a force for evil or some other nefarious, purpose, right? And so I think the number one thing is to engage, and I think the other thing, and I'll give Great Books a shout out again for this, is just thinking deeply about it, thinking about what could go wrong. One of our investors is a guy named Josh Wolf from Lux, who's a brilliant guy, and he says failure comes from a failure to imagine failure. And
failure comes from a failure to imagine failure. I'm failing to fully comprehend that, but I'm thinking about it.
But I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. You do need to think before you build the thing, what are all the things that could go wrong with this thing, and how do I protect against that? And then, there's an ongoing debate about what place should the government, have in this. And that is a balance, right? Because the reality is, again, we're not operating in a vacuum. There are, nations that are moving very aggressively to win this race who don't share our values. And so it is a tricky thing, but I'd say my number one thing is engage, think deeply, don't fail to imagine, failure. Actually think about what could go wrong and then try to build protections in for that.
Amen, amen. Well, we got some students in here whose industries in 10 years that they'll be working don't even exist right now. What sort of attributes of mind and character and disposition are going to be best suited for the world that's about to come that you and your colleagues are building and imagining?
I think we need a lot of people who are coming from a place of faith, who are coming from a place of mission and wanting to give to the world rather than take from the world right now more than ever. And the reason is technology is moving faster than it's ever moved before. I gave the example of like a few years ago when we started Armada, Starlink was very nascent. It was like an early stage consumer product. We had no Anthropic. We didn't have Waymo. There was no, full self-driving. So you think about all of these technologies and how fast they're evolving. 10 years is like lifetimes in this world that we're living in. And the people who are engaged now shaping that have a tremendous opportunity, but also a big responsibility. And so to me, Pepperdine, and this is one reason why, Betsy and I have been spending a lot of time down here and just trying to engage, is I think Pepperdine has a uniquely important place in the world that we find ourselves in today, helping to shape people of character who will go out and build the next great company that changes the world, but do it from a place of faith, from a place of mission, and from a place of trying to give to the world.
Amen. And you're not just saying these things. We've been, over the last almost year, in conversations about something launching at Pepperdine that combines those things.
I wasn't going to spoil it, so.
Yeah, well, why don't you say a few words about, I've already alluded to it publicly before, but we haven't really talked specifically about it, but tell us what you're partnering with Pepperdine on with respect to the incubator.
I am really excited about this. So the incubator we've been working on, it's a startup in itself. It started from an idea and a discussion, but now it's a real thing. And what we're going to do is to work with students here on campus. We are going to give them mentorship from people who have built successful companies in the world. And we are going to try to inspire the next generation of amazing entrepreneurs to start companies straight out of Pepperdine and then launch them out into the world and actually help them get to a prototype, help them with all the things that you need to do to get to a company off the ground, including creating the technology, casting the vision, actually describing the problem that it's solving, and how, if that is solved, it really matters in the world, and how it could create a really big company, and then obviously raising money as well. So I'm very excited about it.
Well, we're very excited about it as well. Dr. Fabian Scalzo will be in the middle of it from Pepperdine, and so will one of our recent alums, Ulysses Saltiel, who's here, who ended up working for you fairly quickly after.
I poached him.
We came to a meeting about this idea. Ulysses was there as a participant, and then a couple weeks later heard, now he's working for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, you were like kind of giving me the nod, like you should hang out with Ulysses. He's a pretty smart guy. And then as I started to talk to him, I'm like, wow, this guy needs to come work at Armada. And so we don't hesitate. We say you have to have top 1% talent and be all in on the mission. And as soon as I met Ulysses, I was like, okay, you belong at Armada.
Amen, amen. Okay, last question before I turn it over to the audience questions. You mentioned 10 years is almost like a lifetime away. Let's think out 10 years for Armada. If we're back here doing a 10-year check-in and you say, man, those last 10 years went how I hoped it would go. Describe for me what you're telling me.
I think with these things, it's always helpful to look back at history, right? And if you flash back to 25 years ago, you had the original hyperscalers becoming household names. Amazon, a book company transformed into a massive hyperscaler. Microsoft, our CTO was one of the founding engineers of Azure, so he basically built the thing from nothing into the monster that you see today. And I think we have an opportunity with Armada to build something even faster. And I think if you look at our progress so far, it would compare very favorably. And I think one of the reasons is there's this massive shift that's going on, not just in technology, but in the underlying infrastructure. You and I were talking about, how this also matters to like the DoD, DOW. You can't use the infrastructure of the past for the world and where it's going, not alone anyway. You need to build for the 70% that hasn't had coverage. And so I think if we do what we can do at Armada, one is we will have a company that is one of the largest companies in the world that is a household name. But more importantly than that, we'll build it in the right way where we will create a fairer world. Our mission is to bridge the digital divide. We don't believe that certain parts of the world should be left behind in this big AI revolution. We'll make sure that everybody can participate, and we'll have played a critical role in preserving America's place as the heart of innovation and as a leader of the free world and a defender of democracy.
Well, may it be so. Guys, a handful of questions here from the audience. First question is there a particular great book that you read at Pepperdine that was most impactful to you? What's a book or two that you thought, that meant something to me?
So Professor Contino would want me to say Brothers Karamazov.
Brothers K.
But I think what I'm going to say is The Divine Comedy. I think just like the
Dante, see, I knew that one.
The depth of it, and also like reading it and going to Florence and seeing kind of all of the history there, it really did impact me. Seeing the inside of the Duomo, depicting heaven and hell and Purgatorio. There was something about that stuck with me in all the ways that I was saying that great books in general stuck with me. Just like the level of depth that he went into and kind of the care that he took for the subject and immersing himself into it, and then thinking about it as an epic. Clearly he was writing that to make his mark in history, and something about that just it's continued to stick with me.
All right, a couple questions about advice. The first is about what advice would you give CEVA graduates for finding a job in the current AI environment, and the second, as a student who's an aspiring attorney and wants to get involved with tech world and business, what advice could you give? So advice to an undergrad who wants to go into the AI world, advice to an aspiring attorney who wants to go into the tech legal world.
Yeah, I mean, first off, if you're an undergrad, there has never been a better time to get into tech. Tech is more accessible than it's ever been before. For those who are a little bit familiar with AI, there used to be this thing that we were talking about even last year called prompting. It was like, okay, if I type in a question to ChatGPT, it will give me an answer or a work product or something. Now you don't even have to do that. You can like whisper into the thing and it just like happens. So you don't need to be an engineer in the traditional sense. What you need to be is somebody who thinks boldly, has unique ideas, and then the courage, going to the Pepperdine theme this year, to pursue those ideas and kind of go for it. And so I think the number one thing I would do is try to learn about whatever area of technology you're most interested in. Try to stay up to date on what's current, which is no easy task because things change every week. But just by doing that, you'll be better positioned to figure out where is there an opportunity. And then the second thing I would do is write down your idea and explain in detail why does it matter, and if you get it right, why does that matter, right? And how big of a company could you build? And then you just start pitching. You start pitching to people that you want to have come join your company, to investors. If you need intros, let me know. I've talked to a lot of investors and do all the time. But I think there's just never been a time where technology was so accessible to somebody who wants to get into it. You just have to look for it. You have to learn about it, and you have to engage. And then as far as lawyers, I get this question actually a lot as I guess I'm still a lawyer, but not a practicing lawyer. And you know what I also tell people is there's no better time to transition if you want to transition from law into business. And I say that for multiple reasons. And not to scare anybody, but like that is one job that will be impacted by AI for sure. And that doesn't mean
research stuff being done by a machine is so much faster.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, the way that law firms bill has always been traditionally like the billable hour, right? And so the incentives are kind of off. If AI can do it all, it won't be able to do it all, but it'll be able to do a lot of it in a fraction of the cost. It sort of breaks the whole model. And so there's things like Harvey now and Ironclad, and there's lots of companies now that are focused on that. So one is just know that and think about what you want to do and where you should be 10 years from now. If you're going to stay in law, I would say embrace the technology. You need to be like an expert in it and then figure out where you can add value beyond that. And then if you want to make the transition, like I said, there's never been a better time to do it, because one thing that lawyers know how to do is they know how to take in massive amounts of information and spot the opportunity, spot the issue. Right. It's what they trained us to do in law school, and that's a big part of finding a good idea and going and building a company.
Analytical reasoning at its best. Okay, the next question is, we talked about the difference between a China-controlled AI world and the US-controlled AI world. What are the differences in strategies that US and China are, how are they approaching it differently, and what's the concern about a China-controlled AI world versus a US-controlled AI world?
I mean, a lot of the concerns that we talk about when it comes to AI in terms of personal privacy, making sure that AI is actually like trustworthy, that it is ethical, like those are things, as far as I know, that are not even discussed in China. It's all about how do they win, and that's kind of it. And so that is very concerning to me. But also I think about like what are all the impacts to that if China wins. One is AI is going to shape everything. It's going to teach your kids. And so I think about this for my kids. I have 3 kids, and then hopefully one day we'll have grandkids. But the idea of AI that is built in China with Chinese value teaching our children is a scary one to me. And then also I think about it in terms of other critical aspects of life, whether you're talking about healthcare or transportation. If we're relying on another country for that, huge security implications. And not to mention, we're going to be importing all this stuff. So it's going to have a massive impact to GDP and just sort of balance of trade and our place in the world. So I worry about that a lot. Like I said, I wake up every day thinking about how do we win. But it's something we need to worry about, because from what I've seen, they do not share our values, and they are not focused on making sure that our values are reflected in any AI that they are producing.
Understood. Okay, 2 more questions from the audience, and then one final question I have for you. So we mentioned earlier the idea of the hyperscaler data centers and the kind of the political pushback that's growing, and it doesn't seem to be coming from only one side of the aisle. There seems to be a growing challenge as the midterm elections approach. Is this a solution? Is this the solution, or is it just a broken up pieces of the solution? Meaning, massive data centers. Well, if they have for the same amount of compute, you got to have the same amount of compute. It's just dispersed.
Yeah.
So tell me how the two go together. Is there a place for both, or is Armada the solution to the current political angst about it?
Yeah, I mean, we wrote about this last year in that same white paper, and what we said is it's an and. We need as much compute as we can get as quickly as possible. You do need the big, hyperscale data centers, but the reality is we're not able to build them fast enough to win this AI race that's going on and to support the demand. There's just a huge amount of demand, kind of like an endless hunger for compute and for GPUs. And so we need to utilize all of the land and all of the power wherever it's available, and do both the hyperscale data centers and the distributed data centers like Armada does. What is nice about what we do is it's like all the benefits with none of the drawbacks, as I was saying, because we use power that's already available, and we're typically not pulling any power from the grid. And we have a closed-loop cooling system, so you're not using any external water. Another big complaint that is raised about the hyperscale data centers is that they can be disruptive to communities. That is not true with us because they're almost always in remote locations. But what we do in communities is create a lot of great high-paying jobs. And the other thing is you also can kind of get immediate ROI. One of the complaints that's raised against the big hyperscale data centers is it takes years to see value, to see the benefits. Ours is immediate, or nearly immediate, and then you can scale up with demand. And so it creates an economic, a real win that can actually lower taxes, that can make people's lives better in the state, and make you as a state or as a community a net exporter of intelligence versus an importer. The same way we think about it on a country level. But we need to do both. And the other thing I would say is I just think that there's like a massive amount of misinformation. Most people, when they think about like why they're mad about a data center, and then you try to get them to explain it, they don't even know, they're just mad about it. And so I think some of it is just, it's kind of like a effect from like smartphones and other technologies that people are projecting on the data centers, where they're like, oh, I tried to get an iPhone because I thought it was going to improve my life, and now I'm addicted to this thing, and it's had all these other unintended consequences. But I think that doesn't mean you shouldn't build data centers, because again, this is going to happen one way or the other. It's just, is America going to lead, or are we not? But I do think we should take those concerns seriously and then try to proactively address them and help people see all the benefits of data centers to communities and to the country.
Great. Last question from the audience, then I'll have one final closeout question. The question has to do with, and I'll give you a 60-second limit on this one, because this can go for 3 hours if we want to talk about this. What's the likelihood of the catastrophic, apocalyptic AI gone wild rogue machine that ends civilization as we know it? Because there's been people who are really smart and very thoughtful who put that probability pretty high.
Yeah.
Well, talk to us about that. I'll give you 60 seconds on that one.
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask me about data centers in space, but okay, we're going with apocalypse. What I would say is I think that is low likelihood if America shows up and if we win. But again, this goes to like, why does this whole race matter? I am less optimistic if somebody who is not thinking about how do we prevent those things is leading the world when it comes to AI, because there is no doubt the technology will be powerful enough. It's just going to be a question of, will the people shaping it choose to do that or not? And an example I'll give you, I know you gave me 60 seconds, is cybersecurity. There's been a lot of buzz recently about these very advanced cybersecurity models like Mythos and other models. Those cyber attacks are going to happen. But what's going to block them? More powerful AI models. And that's how you should think about AI in general. The person who leads is going to win, and it's like good versus evil, and we need to make sure that we have the upper hand.
Good needs to win, then. That's the point?
Pretty much.
Okay, good. Last question. You've heard talk at Pepperdine, anybody who's been around Pepperdine for a while, about greater purpose, about preparing students for lives of greater purpose. Obviously, you've been involved in several industries that are changing the way we do things. You're now in the midst of one that is potentially 100 times more of a change than we've had before. What would you say if you look back on your life right now and then look ahead? What is your greater purpose? What do you feel like you were put here on earth to do?
I think I'm doing exactly what I was put on earth to do, which is to try to build something that has a positive impact in the world and hopefully inspire some other mission-driven, faith-driven entrepreneurs in the process to do this same thing. I think that the world right now is, in many ways, a messy and scary place. We cannot have enough people that are mission-driven, building companies that are going to shape the future of technology. And so part of my purpose is kind of like we're doing here, talking about why I'm doing what I'm doing and how fulfilling it is for me. And hopefully that'll inspire others to do their own quest, their own good quest. And collectively, we can make a really positive impact on the world.
Well, and being involved in here at Pepperdine with this new incubator, you're bringing people along on this journey with you. And so thank you for this. Thank you for the opportunity to get a window into what's happening in the AI world through somebody who's in the middle of it, and not just in the middle of it, but on the leading edge of it, if I could say the edge. If you like what you see about President Speaker Series, the next one coming up is going to be on October 23rd. Here in this room at noon, Catherine Burblesing. She's an education reformer. She's known as the strictest headmistress in Great Britain. And so she's going to be here talking about the next phase of excellence in education. So you're not going to want to miss that. But let's all thank Dan Wright for today.
Thanks, everybody. Go Waves.
One more thing. If you walk around campus, you will see everywhere that the theme for this year is courage. And every year we have coins that we give to the people who are demonstrating courage. And so I've got a courage coin that they just were released today. So I want to make sure I give you this courage coin. Thank you for your courage and the way you're leading. God bless you.
This is going to my office. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.